Thank you, Paul. What a pleasure to see you folks. Thanks for coming. You know, Paul von Bramer was, if I can remember back that far, I'm pretty sure he was my first supervisor at Eastman. So I have to credit Paul for whatever you see up here. When I came here, all my coworkers, you know, I was here, some 15 years after the Oak Ridge, after the World War II operation kind of slowed down. All my coworkers were either involved at Oak Ridge or at Holston Ordnance Works. That's all they talked about. Very proud of the work, glad to see it. So, next week, as Paul mentioned, I'm going to talk about the atomic bomb story. RDX...
Next month, not next week.
I always have to be straightened out because I always get wrong. Anyway, next month, this organization meets once a month, first Monday each month. And they've asked me, I asked to divide this into two parts. One, the RDX story, and then how that led to Eastman operating Oak Ridge, which Eastman did. That's not widely known, but it's true. So, talking about the Tennessee Eastman Corporation, as it was known then, and how Eastman affected, maybe I should say the Eastman, how the Eastman affected RDX versus actually participation, I should say, in the Battle of the Atlantic. RDX. What in the world is that stuff? Why is it important? Who made it? What did it do? Well, many of you know it's the most powerful explosive. Where's Howard? Howard, that's a new word, annotating. I'd never used that before. I understand that means after some such, after the date. Anyway, most powerful exploding, annotating the atomic bomb. RDX. Actually, the name is when the British were working on this project. It's interesting. What goes around comes around. The British were very much involved in RDX, and I'll get into that. Stands for Research Development Explosive. All of you will want to know. Howard will give a test when this is over. You have to draw the structure, and it's cyclotrimethylene trinitramine is one of the names. It has plenty names. We're going to call it Research Development Explosive. Actually, we're going to call it RDX. As I said, before the atomic bomb, it was the most potent thing we had. Here's what it's all about. What, why, who, and when is during World War II. I'm repeating myself here a few times, but why would anyone want to make this cyclotrigobbledygook or whatever it is? Good name for it. Why should I be here listening to myself talk? Well, did you know RDX dates all the way back to a German chemist who patented this compound in 1898. The Germans did it first. And during World War II, they made RDX also, made about 50% of the total. Well, we made twice as much as they did, let's put it that way. Oh, okay. Well, 5 years later, there was this fellow, he was a corporal in some army in Germany, but if you haven't read, I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, because I wanted to know how in the world that man gained power of the most sophisticated most intelligent country, education-wise, in the world. Became the head guy. He came to power in 33. In 34, the British were doing a little spying, and they learned that the Germans were using some of that superior technology that they still show us, and they made their submarines such that TNT would not disable them. We didn't have anything that would disable a U-boat after World War II started. Okay, what happened after 1934? Well, this fellow who had come to power in March 38, he annexed Austria. The same year, in September, he took over Czechoslovakia. Y'all know this. A year later, he marched into Poland. Just crushed it. Now, if you read Mein Kampf, which I have not done, but I've read about it, Mein Kampf, I understand, Hitler tells all his plans and everything else. And his plan was to increase the size of Germany by going across Poland into Russia and such. He captured Poland in no time. But England and France had a treaty with Poland. They'd promised to aid Poland if attacked. So when Germany crunched Poland, France and England declared war on Germany, and vice versa. Where do we stand? Where do USA stand? Well, Winston Churchill, man, he worked on President Roosevelt. Did he ever? He came to this country a bunch of times. He got Roosevelt to meet him in various places. He convinced Roosevelt that we would lose World War II if the USA did not get involved. Well, Roosevelt's mind was made up when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And then when that happened, everybody declared war on, it just went around the ring. If you hadn't declared war on everybody else, that was the time to do it. And they did. This Battle of the Atlantic was a descriptor of a major conflagration. What's the word I want to use? A major conflict, thank you, in the getting men and materials, etc., from the USA, Canada, North and South America, to Europe, and especially to England. And by golly, we couldn't sink the U-boats. We had to find a way to do that, or we were going to lose the Battle of the Atlantic. And how about turning those lights off over here, if you don't mind, if that's all right with you, on the camera.
It's a little dark.
Little dark. He wants some lights on. Okay. We'll be lit up. Either win the Battle of the Atlantic, or Hitler could actually had a good possibility of winning the war. That's what we were dealing with. We had to find a way to defeat the Nazi U-boats. We had to ship goods and materials to England to do this. And we had to get through. Well, Germany barricaded, blocked. They wouldn't allow shipping in or out of England. And they were successful. It's a frightening story. You can go on the internet and learn more about it. I have here a list of the 1,100 Allied ships that were sunk by the U-boats during those 3 years. 1,100, over that amount. And we didn't have any way to stop them at that time. Word was put out, we got to find a way. Churchill convinced FDR Germany would win unless the USA got involved. You know, Churchill set up a lot of meetings with Roosevelt, did a tremendous selling job as he could do. But the Japanese played their part. They bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, when that happened, everybody had to declare war on somebody else, and they did. So war was declared. It was a mess. England and France had promised to aid Poland, and I have already said that Germany, the Nazis crunched Poland, just ran right over Poland. France and England declared war on Germany as a result of that, and vice versa. Of course, Germany declared war on them. I rigged up a little timeline starting in 1898 when a German chemist by the name of George, did I pronounce that close to, that's not right. Help me with Georg, Friedrich Henning. He patented RDX, or he patented the compound that was later named that. 1930s, Hitler made his way to the top of Germany. He was a dictator, chancellor of Germany. British spies learned that he directed U-boats to be tougher. Now, U-boats had played a part in World War I, but I'm not going to get into that. But, okay, they started making U-boats. They ended up making over 1,100 U-boats. I get that right? I've got so many numbers here. They made a bunch. 1938, Hitler annexed Austria. In March and September, Czechoslovakia, as many of you know, was essentially given to Hitler to pacify him, hoping that that'd be enough to satisfy him, but it didn't. And he went on to, in Mein Kampf, he said what he was going to do in his book, and his book was widely circulated. All those treaties had a big factor. England and France were backing Poland, and when Germany marched into Poland and took it over, England and France had to declare war on them, so I've already said. I think I've already had that slide, but we're talking, it was called the Battle of the Atlantic for the USA to get involved, because the way they could get involved early and materially was to ship goods and materials to England. But Germany declared a blockade around England using their U-boats. So we had to find a way to beat these things. CT&T could not be depended on to sink them. They had a double hull, steel, air gap in between. They were tough. But we got to win the Battle of the Atlantic or face the possibility that we're going to be speaking Deutsch. I already said it, TNT was just not strong enough. Well, what in the world? I've been saying U-boats. What in the world? There's a picture of a typical one, and they made well over 1,000 of these things. Well, the German word for these is Unterseeboot. And that's good German on my part. Undersea boats is what it's about, submarines. Why are they important? Well, they were doing what they were designed to do. Sink ships. We couldn't sink them. 3,500 merchant ships were sunk by U-boats during the war. Can you imagine? 3,500 ships. 14 million tons of materials went to the bottom of the ocean. 175 warships were sunk by U-boats. Winston Churchill said it was his number one concern. He called FDR for a meeting in Casablanca, and that was in the first of 43. And he and Roosevelt discussed these, said this has got to be our number one priority, to be able to defeat U-boats. And Roosevelt agreed. Number one priority. After the war, Churchill was quoted as saying, the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Go on the web, Google U-boats during World War II. You'll see lots of photographs of how one U-boat would sink 6, 8 merchant ships full of men and materials at one time. They formed what they call wolf packs of U-boats, and they would circle a convoy of Allied ships, and it was like shooting ducks in a pond or whatever. Churchill is quoted as saying that the Battle of the Atlantic was the dominating factor all through the world. Never for one moment could we forget that everything happening elsewhere. I believe this sounds a little bit like Churchill when we say on land, at sea, or in the air, depended ultimately on the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. Well, RDX was known, it was first patented by the Germans, but it patented is long expired. What is this magic stuff? Well, why in the world are we not making it? Well, I remember when I was in high school. Now I'm talking about the early 1950s, about 52 or 3. I had a very special chemistry teacher who gave me a lot of one-to-one. It's the reason I majored in chemistry and all that stuff. Anyway, one day he said, "You want to see something interesting? Come to the lab after school." Well, he gave me safety glasses in the lab. He made up something in a solution, cast it on a piece of paper. He mixed some sugar in with this solution. When he put it on the piece of paper, the sugar in that stuff that he had made up attracted a housefly. Housefly landed on it. Poof! It was like a cap. You remember cap guns? It was like that, except nothing had happened except a housefly had landed on that stuff. But that housefly disappeared in a flash of light. He told me that was a product that we're talking about today. I'm sure it was illegal as all get out to be showing a high school kid how to make it. He did not show me how to make it. He showed me what happened when he made it. Well, out of the West, I had planned to have some Lone Ranger music here, and that didn't work out. Out of the West, help comes. The Lone Ranger. Well, actually, it wasn't him. It was 4 let's see if I don't think I can get any music here, but we'll see. 4 Tennessee Eastman. Oh well, I'm a very successful at this sort of thing, as you can see. So the Lone Ranger arrives. I'm going backwards. I am. Let's see if I can make it go forward. Maybe this is it. Okay. All right, 4 Eastman scientists were on the way to a meeting in Washington, D.C. They were talking about this problem. It was known that RDX was a lot more potent than TNT. People say it was twice. Others have said it was 10 times. That's probably exaggerating more in a little bit, but regardless, it was projected that RDX would penetrate a U-boat and that would solve that problem. Who are these men? How many knew one of these? Let's see some hands. How many knew 2 of these? Or 3? How many knew all 4 of them? I'm pleased to see that, really. Great. You know, Herb Stone, I've worked with his, are his granddaughters here? They were invited, but they operate Rotherwood Stables. And I've spent some time out there. They love to talk about their grandfather, who was Herb Stone. They named this highway after him, Stone Drive, etc., etc., etc. He was well respected, a very successful scientist. On this train, they talking to each other, they said, well, we can make this. We can make this stuff, right at Tennessee Eastman. We've got materials. We've got people, engineers who can do this. Prior to this, RDX could not be made commercially. It would explode. I told you how easy it was to set off by a housefly. They discovered how to slow it down so that they could make it in commercial quantities. Hey, you can get the story if you go out to a historical marker that's under the bridge that goes over the Holston River, right adjacent to Eastman property. Wexler Bend is what it's called. Where the bridge goes over the Holston River, if you drive around and under it, you'll see this, historical marker, which credits, very accurately, credits Tennessee Eastman Company for doing this. Wexler Bend pilot plant made RDX, proving a single stage process worked as promised. Before they had to do multi-stage. Took forever to make it. Explosions happened along the way. These folks showed that didn't have to be. Could make it safely. Well, they took some samples up to the Pentagon for a demonstration. How many of you seen demonstrations of how effective RDX is? It'll blow a hole through, what, a 1/4 inch of steel or such. I mean, it can be made to penetrate a U-boat, which TNT would not do. Well, they took some RDX from this pilot plant to the Pentagon, and I love to say it blew the caps off the admirals and generals when they demonstrated how it would go through steel. Well, when that happened, the government said, when can we have it? We've got to have this or we're going to lose the war that we're having with Germany. Well, the government bought 6,000 acres over here on the west side of town. 20,000 construction workers came to TEC. How many of you were involved with one or more of these construction workers? I knew I'd see some hands. How in the world? I mean, that's more than double the population of Kingsport. And they came sweeping in here. They built Holston Ordnance Works. It was called HAP, Holston Army Ammunition Plant. The two words were kind of interchangeable. They used Civic Auditorium building, filled every room, the center of it for engineering work. It was Eastman engineers. It was Army engineers. It was military engineers and such. They used every room, nook, and cranny that could be found or that could be made. I've gotten lots of notes from folks saying, we gave up a couple of bedrooms. We all moved into one bedroom so we could house some of these people, and they slept in shifts, 8-hour shifts. They could have 2 or 3 people renting one room, and they would sleep when they weren't working, and they worked around the clock. 42, a conception. 22 months later, this plant came on stream. Unreal. That does not happen. We used to say Eastman was slow back when I worked with him, but by golly, this was not slow. This was a miracle. Yeah. During World War II, the little company out here on the river, Tennessee Eastman Corporation, made over 1 billion pounds, with a B, of course, of what was called Comp B. It's also called plastic explosive, and I don't need to get into too much of that. But when they supplied this material to our military, boy, U-boats began to disappear because they were being sunk. Now, there were a lot of other things. It wasn't just RDX. Radar came along, all kinds of high-tech ways of locating these U-boats. But they couldn't sink them with TNT, but they sure could with Comp B. Now, Comp B is I think is a 60-40 blend of RDX and TNT. It's got some plasticizers in it or waxes or such, so that it's malleable. So, German U-boats no longer controlled the Atlantic, and we could ship material to Europe, to England. Well, you know what happened? D-Day. That enabled D-Day to happen. We were able to get material. We could not have gotten materials to England if we didn't have a way to destroy U-boats. Now, my next door neighbor, back in those days, we've lived in the same place 40-something years. My next door neighbor was Andy Scott, whom most of you knew. Andy was director of Holston Ordnance for several years. He used to say, Dave, you need to write a book on how Tennessee Eastman Corporation won World War II. Well, he made a strong argument, but I did not write the book. I should have. Is Colin Baxter here, Dr. Baxter?
Yep.
Over here. Dr. Baxter, introduce yourself if he doesn't mind. He's retired director of history at ETSU, and he's doing a book on this subject.
Yes. I'm Colin Baxter, retired chair of the history department at ETSU. And yes, Dave's exactly right that I am writing a history of RDX during World War II. And as he says, Holston Ordnance Works played a huge role in winning World War II. And as he said, he qualifies that to some degree. We all remember the Liberty ships of World War II and how we outproduced. Our production of merchant ships was certainly crucial in the Battle of the Atlantic, but you're absolutely right. Until RDX, depth charges, and torpedoes, TNT could not sink Japanese submarines and merchant ships, and we couldn't sink U-boats until Comp B, as it was locally known. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Let me repeat, Dr. Baxter, retired head of the director of the Department of History at ETSU. He's writing a book on this subject. Golly, I'm glad to hear that. Later on, let's see if I can, well, I'm not going to worry about it. Later on, see, the government built an atomic bomb based on material made by Eastman in Oak Ridge. That was dropped on Hiroshima. Took 75 pounds. I'm going to talk about this next month. DuPont made a bomb based on plutonium, which is derived from uranium. They were located out in Hanford, Washington. And RDX had to be used in their bomb to make it the plutonium had to be compressed, held in place for I'm looking at Howard. If I get too far off, he'll help me, I'm hoping. Critical mass is when an atom breaks apart and the fragments from it hit other atoms and break them apart. And pretty soon you have all this energy being released that has been holding atoms together. You know, Einstein said, take the mass, multiply it times the speed of the light 2 times. And that's how much energy is released. It's a phenomenal amount of energy holding an atom together. Einstein said E equals mc squared, energy, mass, speed of light squared. That's the extent of my knowledge of that. But RDX became part of the nuclear program in the bomb that was designed up in Hanford, Washington, the plutonium bomb, and that was dropped on Nagasaki. So we had uranium in the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, we being Tennessee Eastman Corporation. We had RDX in the bomb that was dropped on that other little town, Nagasaki. And we had, did Rudy leave? He had, oh, here's Rudy. Rudy Greer, this young fellow was on a ship that went into Nagasaki Harbor shortly after the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. He was the assistant navigator, USS McCoy Reynolds. Aren't you proud of him? Remember the name. Rudy had a lot to do with laying out how to get to Nagasaki. They got there. The emperor had surrendered, thank God. They were on their way to invade Japan, and he would not be here had the atomic bomb not been created and dropped on Nagasaki. Because that initial wave, we know darn well they had all been eradicated by the Japanese. Howard Young was very much involved in delivery of the uranium for the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Howard has a terrific paper on the internet. If you Google his name, Howard S. Young, Kingsport, you'll get a paper that he wrote some years back, still accurate, on this program. Because when Howard's working on his PhD, he went to work for Eastman, reported to Oak Ridge. And let's see, what was it, 4 years later, was it? His wife, Ann, admitted that she was a spy for the FBI while they lived in Oak Ridge. He didn't even know that until 30-something years later. Talk to Howard about it. Ann kept that a secret. That's one reason this is not well known. This whole program's not well known, is because the government had fierce rulings on keeping this a secret. I worked with Bill Gideon, and Bill used to talk about a chemistry professor, analytical chemistry, who during class one day he said, I think I know what they're doing at Oak Ridge. They've hired me to do some analytical work, and it looks to me like they are working, I don't know how he said it, but they're working on uranium coming apart and making this bomb. Well, Dr. Robertson disappeared, according to Bill Gideon. You've heard the story, huh? Nancy has. Now, he was only gone for, I don't know, a few weeks or such, and then Dr. Young came back, and he would never tell why or where he went or anything else. But he talked too much, and somebody in the class reported him to the FBI, and he disappeared, like I said. And that happened to several people. Okay. HOW. Boy, I get carried away and don't know when to stop. You know, after the thing was built, they required about 7,000 people to operate it. Over 2,500 of them, over a third of them, were women. Now, these folks, both men and women, were off the streets and alleyways or whatever, the paths in this region. Many of them, this was their first job, first time they'd ever worked outside the home. They all had a garden and that kind of, farm. Although making the most powerful chemical explosive, only 3 of these people were killed by work-related fatalities during the war. None of them were killed by an explosive. That's the safety record that resulted from the training that these people got from Eastman. I am so proud of that. Those of us who worked at Eastman know what that means. Now, over on this table, there is an award that TEC and HOW won. It's called the E Award. It was distributed in 1943. If you have a chance to come look at it, it was highly coveted, considered very important, but Tennessee Eastman Corporation got that award. In addition, J.C. White got a Christmas Eve, I think it was, Christmas Eve phone call in the late evening from California. When was that, 42, 43, somewhere in that era. By golly, that was unusual. Got a phone call from California, Mr. White did. It was this fella who said, we want you to run a second plant. Mr. White said, no, I can't do that. We've got all of our employees tied up. There are only a couple of thousand left. They've either been drafted or they work at Holston. But General Leslie Groves, said, you don't have a choice. You got to do it. The country needs you, and you've shown that you know how to run a business starting from zero. Mr. White said, well, let's meet in Rochester and talk to my boss. So General Groves met with J.C. White, and I can't name them offhand, but the president of Eastman Kodak and some folks up there, and convinced them that Eastman did not have a choice. They've got to operate this plant. Now, one other, I'll try to be brief, one other quick story. FDR, of course, was a decision maker. When he was told, we need you to build this plant, they wouldn't tell him what or where, what they were going to make, or how much, or how many employees. I guess, well, maybe 1,500 employees is what Mr. White was told by our government. And he didn't have any choice, really. They applied such pressure that Mr. White took him to Rochester and got approval reluctantly. Eastman did not want to be a military operation. Didn't want to depend on the government for income. Maybe they should have. Kodak, anyway, refused. Well, Leslie Groves, he's written a book. At Last It Can Be Told is the title of his book. And you can order a copy of it over Amazon.com. I did. I've got a copy here somewhere. Anyway, General Groves tells how that happened. He ended up director of the Manhattan Project, which was all these facilities, the one up in Hanford, Washington, out in Los Alamos, and the test that was done out there on the plutonium bomb. Now, the uranium bomb that was made by Eastman was never tested. The first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and it worked. There was no pilot plant. There were no tests run. But it made a big boom, and Hiroshima disappeared. Then, what was it, 2 days later, the DuPont bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. It had been tested in Los Alamos or close to it. It had been tested. They didn't know whether, plutonium is a derivative of uranium. They didn't know whether it would work or not. But they used some RDX and got it to work in a tower and all that kind of stuff. It destroyed Nagasaki. The emperor surrendered. He gave up because they were doing firebombing in Tokyo at the same time with conventional weapons. Well, we're going to talk more about it. I've talked too much about it already. We're going to talk more about that next month. And thank you for coming. If you've got time for questions, I've got time for answers. Thank you. Thank you.